My name is Sister Annalise Moore, Order of the Sacred Chalice, and the last time I truly believed in heaven, I was 17. That was before the convent. Before the silence became a commandment. Before I buried the part of me that used to ask questions. It was in early October, in our convent near Elkwood, Virginia, a small rural town surrounded by ancient oak trees and farmland that always smelled of something between smoke and soil. The mornings were always thick with fog, as if the earth itself tried to forget what it had done in the night. I had been feeling faint for days. It was like my heart had turned into a poorly wound clock, skipping beats, sometimes racing ahead without reason. But I said nothing. I prayed harder. That's what we're taught to do. Pain, after all, is holy if endured quietly. That night, the linen in the infirmary smelled like dust. I remember that because it was the last thing I noticed before my vision collapsed into itself like burnt paper. I didn't fall so much as sink, into the mattress, into myself, into something deeper than pain. And then, I was somewhere else. Not a dream. No floating, no warmth. There was weight. Real weight. The floor beneath me was cold marble, but cracked and weeping something like oil. I stood in a cathedral I had never seen before, immense, circular, and lit only by hundreds of dying candles, their flames bowing low, as if ashamed. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, oxygen deprivation, maybe. But then I heard the chanting. It came from nowhere, and yet from inside the walls themselves. A slow, droning murmur like a prayer being sung backward. Latin words, but distorted. Broken. The same few syllables over and over again, corpus, fractum, ignis, fractum. The body, broken, fire, broken. A figure moved between the pillars. Tall, skeletal, wearing vestments so old they seemed grown from the stone itself. I called out. My voice came out wrong, echoing in a way that felt like I was hearing it a second too late. The figure didn't speak, but raised a hand. I took a step forward, and the marble beneath me cracked. Something was wrong with this place. Holy, but hollow. Beautiful, but dead. A cathedral, yes. But not for God. Then I saw the altar. There was no crucifix. There was no bread. There was no wine. Instead, there was a mirror. Oval. Framed in something that looked like bone. And when I looked into it, I didn't see myself. I saw the convent. My convent. Our chapel, only it was full of people I didn't recognize, kneeling in perfect silence. Their eyes were sewn shut. Their mouths stitched into neutral lines. Their hands folded, perfectly. Reverently. Like statues. Then, all at once, their heads turned toward me, in unison. Even though their eyes were sealed, I felt them watching. I turned away from the mirror, my heart now thundering. But the skeletal figure was gone. The candles were out. The cathedral was silent again, but it wasn't empty. A voice, so clear and close it felt like breath against my ear, whispered. The church is no longer mine. And then I woke up, gasping, clutching the linen that still smelled like dust. The nurse screamed and dropped the tray she was holding. I had been declared dead 15 minutes earlier. They said it was a miracle. I knew better. It was a message. They made me rest, of course. Doctors were called. Monsignor Blake came from Richmond. Sisters wept in relief, though some, I noticed, wept without tears. But I couldn't rest. Sleep had become a dangerous thing. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again, the church is no longer mine. What did it mean? Heresy. Blasphemy. I tried to push the words away, bury them beneath scripture, routine, obedience. But they clung to me like incense smoke on skin, faint, sour, persistent. I kept the mirror to myself. For days, I said nothing. I returned to duties in the chapel, in the garden, at the orphanage kitchen where we made lentil soup for children too quiet for their age. I folded linens. I tended lilies. I pretended to be alive. But the world had changed. Not all at once, no, this was subtler than that. I began noticing things. First, the crucifix in our small chapel, the one carved by Sister Alma in 1953, was different. Christ's eyes had always been closed, in serene surrender. But now, I swear, they were open. Watching. His face, not peaceful, but tight with strain. Not agony, anger. Then the bells. Every morning at 6 o'clock, I rang them to call the sisters to lauds. But one morning, I climbed to the bell tower and found the rope soaked. Dripping. Sticky. It looked like oil, it smelled like blood. I went to Sister Marianne, our Mother Superior. She's been here for 40 years, a stern but kind woman with hands like carved stone. I need to talk, I said. She offered tea. Earl Grey. Poured it with quiet grace. I saw something, I said. When I left. She didn't interrupt. She just stared at me, but her gaze wasn't of concern. It was cautious. Like someone hearing a sound behind a closed door. I told her everything. The cathedral. The mirror. The figures. The voice. When I finished, she didn't speak for a full minute. Then, softly. You mustn't speak of this again. I blinked. What? I believe you experienced something, spiritual. But the church has enemies who would love to twist your vision into scandal. You understand, don't you? She smiled. But her eyes didn't. And behind her on the wall, the portrait of Saint Agatha had cracked, right down the center. That night, I woke up at 3:17 again. Same time I had died. There was someone standing in my room. Not moving. Not breathing. A figure in a nun's habit, but her veil hung stiff like iron. Her hands were folded, but they looked too long. Wrong. I turned on the lamp. There was no one. Only the faint sound of chanting in the hallway. Too soft to follow. Too familiar to ignore. I got up, against every rule, every instinct, and followed it barefoot through the corridor. It led to the reliquary chamber, where we kept the skull fragment of St. Jude, the patron of the hopeless. I opened the door. Empty. No relic. Only a broken mirror, leaned against the wall. Same shape. Same bone frame. This time, it reflected not me, not the convent, but a congregation of eyeless bishops, seated in judgment, holding candles that dripped onto their own skin. One by one, they raised their fingers and pointed. At me. Then I heard it, his voice again. Not whispering. Roaring, like thunder behind words. The hollow serve the hollow. The faithful must awaken. Or the fire will come. The mirror shattered. But not with sound. With silence, so deep it crushed my breath. I fled. No one believed me the next day. The mirror was gone. The reliquary whole. The relic untouched. But something was different now in the eyes of the other sisters. A hesitation. A flicker of knowing. And in Sister Marianne's office, where I waited to be reprimanded for breaking curfew, I saw a book left open on her desk. Latin script, ancient ink. But one phrase was circled in red. Ecclesia dormit. Draken emelit. The church sleeps. It feeds the dragon. The church sleeps. It feeds the dragon. That phrase haunted me for days. I pretended not to have seen it. I told no one. But my prayers began to tremble. We all wore masks in that place, white linen and lowered eyes. But something in me had cracked, and the cracks were growing. It's strange how quickly silence can turn into isolation. At meals, the sisters spoke less. Their hands moved in perfect unison, cutting bread, sipping water, folding napkins, but their eyes rarely blinked. Their rosaries never clinked. They were too still. Too rehearsed. Something had changed. Or maybe it had always been like this, and I had only just woken up. I returned to the bell tower one evening under the guise of cleaning. I had to know if I imagined the oil, the blood. But the rope was dry now, brittle. I pulled it, once. The bell gave off a flat, muted tone, as if choked by the air itself. I turned to leave and noticed a seam in the stonework behind the ladder. Subtle, vertical, almost invisible unless you looked for it. I pressed my hand to it. It was colder than the rest of the wall. My fingers found a gap. A small panel slid open with a whisper. Inside was a stairwell, narrow and spiraling down. That stair should not exist. I had memorized every blueprint of the convent in my novitiate years. There were no sublevels beneath the tower. I hesitated only once, then descended. The steps were stone, wet with something that smelled of rot. There was no light, but the walls themselves pulsed faintly, a gray, organic shimmer like bioluminescence in deep water. I descended 15 steps, maybe more. At the bottom, a wooden door, ancient, with symbols I didn't recognize carved into its surface. Not crosses. Not icons. Something older. Sharper. The door was unlocked. Inside was a single room. Low ceiling. Dirt floor. Shelves lined with books wrapped in cloth. At the center, a small altar made of black wood, with a silver bowl and a candle long since dead. I opened one of the books. It was written in English, but the ink was faint, like water-damaged newsprint. The handwriting was feminine, looping, emotional. Journal of Sister Catherine de Vere, 1912. The entries were scattered, unstable, like someone writing in desperation. He appeared to me again last night. Not as a man. Not even as the Christ I knew. Something brighter. Something terrible. His eyes burned through the walls. He said, "They wear my name, but serve the hollow God." Mother Elise said I was unwell. Gave me laudanum. But the visions persist. There is a door under the chapel. I must not open it. But it sings to me. They buried the girl alive. Her name was Clara. She spoke in tongues, but not demonic, it was warning. She said, "You will turn gold into ash if you do not wake up." They said she was possessed. I know she was touched by truth. I dropped the journal. Dust rose from the floor like breath. The candle, dead for decades, flickered back to life. Something was here. Not evil, not quite. But vast. Watching. I backed out slowly, closed the door, and climbed the stairs. The convent above me was silent. But not empty. I could feel them, the sisters. Standing just behind the walls. Listening. I ran back to my cell. Locked the door. That night, I dreamed of the mirror again. But now, the eyeless bishops were burning. And in their place stood children, barefoot, crying, holding torches. One stepped forward. A girl, maybe 7, with no mouth, just raw skin where lips should have been. She pressed her palm to the mirror. A word bled onto the glass, letter by letter. Unmake. I woke up screaming. No one came. But there was ash on my bed sheets. And a single word, carved into the wooden floorboards beneath me, Clara. I didn't sleep the next night. Or the one after that. But on the third night, I dreamt anyway. Not because I closed my eyes, but because she called me. I found myself in the convent's chapel, only everything was reversed. The pews faced the wrong way. The crucifix was upside down, not blasphemously, but as if to mourn. The stained glass windows bled light instead of letting it in. And behind the altar stood the girl from the mirror. Clara. No mouth. Bare feet. White nightgown stained at the hem with something dark. She held out a hand, and when I hesitated, she stepped forward and touched my chest. Her skin was cold and electric. I gasped, not from pain, but memory. I saw it all. 1913. A different time. A different chapel. The sisters in stiff black habits, standing in a circle around Clara. She writhed on the floor, speaking a language no one recognized, not tongues, not Latin, something older, closer to bone and wind than to speech. But she wasn't possessed. She was radiant. Her skin glowed faintly. Her voice didn't plead for mercy. She warned. The church is no longer the bride. She is the mask. The fire comes. The hollow will not stand. Mother Elise ordered the exorcism. But it wasn't holy water they used. It was lime. And then they buried her. Alive. Beneath the chapel floor. I screamed myself awake. My throat was raw. My bed sheets soaked with sweat. And on the floor beside me, scratched into the stone with fingernails or worse, a shape. A symbol. The same one carved into the door beneath the bell tower. I drew it in my journal, though my hands shook. I had to remember. She was real. Her memory was in the walls. The next day, I skipped morning prayers. Instead, I went to the archives, a room no one entered unless summoned. The oldest records were locked in a steel cabinet. I used the set of skeleton keys I'd secretly taken from the sacristy. Forgive me, Lord. The hinges screamed. Inside, yellowed papers, half-crumbling volumes, and something wrapped in blue silk. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a baptismal record. Clara Everly. Born 1906. Baptized 1912. Deceased 1913, cause, spiritual corruption. There was a note clipped to the bottom. Do not exhume. The spirit remains dangerous. Manifestations continue. Recommending rite of silencing. I took the record, pressed it to my chest, and whispered the only thing I could. I believe you. That night, she came again. This time, not in a dream. She stood at the foot of my bed. No longer afraid. Her eyes were glowing faintly. She didn't speak, couldn't, but she opened her mouth anyway. And from the blood-red hollow came a sound I'll never forget. A bell. Ringing once. Low. Final. Then she vanished. When I woke, the sound remained, not echoing in my ears, but in the walls. The whole convent trembled with it. Sisters looked uneasy. Some clutched their rosaries tighter. Others stared at nothing at all, as if listening to a song only they could hear. At dinner, Sister Claire began bleeding from her nose. At Compline, Sister Eleanor collapsed and whispered. He's walking beneath the chapel again. They took her away. I wasn't told where. But I knew. That night, I went back to the hidden stairwell, this time with a lantern, a rosary, and the pages from Clara's file. I descended, heart pounding, every step heavier than the last. When I reached the bottom, the door was open. And behind it, the room was changed. Now, there were statues. 7. Hooded. Standing in a circle. Each had no face, only mirrors where their heads should have been. And in the center, on the altar, a heart, real, beating, resting in a bowl of wine. Clara stood beside it, still silent. But behind her, someone else stepped forward. Tall. Cloaked in smoke. Wearing a crown of thorns inward, piercing their own skull. Their eyes were fire. Their mouth split not with teeth, but with light. I am not the false god they fear, the being said. I am the flame behind the veil. I do not come to comfort. I come to consume. I fell to my knees. Not in worship, but in terror. Because deep down, I knew who this was. Not Satan. Not Christ. Truth. The unfiltered, radiant, impossible truth, the fire too bright for ceremony or robe, unspoken by priests, buried beneath hymns. They sealed me beneath icons. They used my name to build tombs. Now the tomb cracks. The sleeping bride must wake. Or she will burn inside her wedding dress. The light surged. I lost sight. I screamed a prayer not from doctrine, but from instinct. Domini, libera nos a veritate. Lord, deliver us from the truth. And then, nothing. I awoke in the infirmary again. But this time, not alone. Sister Marianne sat beside me. Her eyes were open wide. And for the first time since I arrived at Elkwood, she looked afraid. The night after the vision, they told me to leave. Not with anger. Not with shame. Just a quiet, heavy finality, as if I had already been buried. Sister Marianne summoned me after Vespers. Her office smelled of frankincense and iron. You're sick, Annalise, she said, softly. We've called someone from the diocese. You'll be transferred. A place with more support. Support. I nodded. But in her voice, I heard something else. Fear disguised as mercy. Not for me. For the convent. For the walls. For what might come out if I stayed. They wanted me gone because I saw it. Because Clara had chosen me. But I had no intention of leaving. That night, the chapel bells rang 12 times at 3 a.m. No one rang them. No one even went to the tower anymore. When I stepped out of my cell, the hallway was filled with fog. Thick, unmoving, like breath held too long. My crucifix burned cold against my chest. The fog shimmered faintly, forming shapes, faces, hands, gestures of warning. They were not demons. They were the forgotten. Clara stood at the far end of the hall, bathed in pale light. She pointed toward the chapel. I followed. The doors were wide open, and every candle inside burned black. Sisters stood frozen in the pews, upright, eyes closed, lips moving silently. Trapped in prayer. Or spell. Or both. In the sanctuary, the statues had cracked. The stained glass had warped. And in place of the altar, where once we kept the blessed sacrament, a mirror. Tall as the apse. Framed in bone. Breathing. And in its surface, I saw not my reflection, but my soul, split in two. On one side, a nun. On the other, fire. Then he stepped through. Not Christ. Not Satan. The voice. The fire-cloaked figure from the undercroft. No longer distant. Now close, unbearably close. The heat of him cracked the pews and peeled paint from the ceiling. You have seen the rot. Will you cleanse it, or cradle it? I collapsed to my knees. My faith, that beautiful lattice of ritual and silence and song, had died long before. This was what was left. And Clara, beside me, placed something in my hand. A match. I knew what she was asking. The convent was hollow. The walls echoed with lies. Beneath its marble skin was a history of silenced children, smothered truths, sermons twisted into cages. This place had worn his name like a mask. Now he had come to tear it off. But he would not do it for us. I had to choose. I stood. Raised the match. Sister Marianne was at the doorway now, screaming, not words, but pleas. Don't. 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 But I struck the match. And the chapel breathed in. I touched the flame to the black candles. They screamed, high, thin, not like wax but like lungs. And the mirror cracked, from top to base, and poured out light. Not warmth. Truth. A flood of burning language poured into the air, and the sisters dropped to their knees, not in prayer but in terror. They remembered. All of them. The buried girls. The sealed voices. The exorcised prophets. They remembered. And I walked out into the cold Virginia night, barefoot, bleeding and free. Behind me, the chapel burned, but not with fire. With glory. The fire brigade came. The church came. They rebuilt it in time. New walls. New paint. A tighter silence. But they never found Clara's bones. And they never found me. Because I had taken something with me when I left. Something they could not steal back. Faith. Not in the church. Not even in Christ. But in the terrible, sacred fact that truth burns. And it loves us enough to burn us clean. Amen.